talk about the progress from day one. Okay, so what happened was that at the beginning of the day, yesterday, the car was taken outside and we took the bonnet off. It's held on, a couple of bolts here, a couple of bolts there. That's where the bonnet hinges on and off. Car was outside. We then emptied the radiator of all the cooling fluid. We also undid this fixing here on the top of the swirl tank and this additional header tank, just to try and make sure that we could get as much of the coolant out outside and deal with it there. The next thing we then did is we then brought the car back inside, and we then went to the back and dealt with the boot area. Okay, so we decided to start at the back of the car first. So the first thing we had to do is had to pull out a lot of carpet, this carpet here, which covers the fuel tank. That then exposes the straps which hold the fuel tank into the back of the car. The straps are located on these positions here, 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 just through there, if you can see that hole, the corresponding one there. Okay, once the fuel tank the straps were removed, we then had to disconnect the fuel from the fuel pump, which is under here. And just about make out the fuel pump, which I'll just put my hand in there, and then we then had to catch all the fuel into some trays, which then I could then dispense into some 1 gallon drums ready to use with my petrol lawnmower sometime next year. Okay, once the tank was empty, then took the tank out. There's a couple of exit points here. This is where the goes to the fuel pump, and I think it's that hole there was this additional hose, which I believe goes to the carbon canister. I suspect I'm going to follow that that pipe work to the canister later on today, which is situated, or was situated, in the offside front wing, but it doesn't live there anymore because I took that out a few years ago. So other things we had to disconnect, we disconnected the stereo. Okay, we had the fuel sender unit here. Once the tank was out of the boot, that then exposed the 4 fixing points which holds the body shell onto the chassis. They're here, 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 and there, down there. Okay, so you can see them 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, they came out. These ones, this one here also had an earth attached. Okay, so that's important, that will go back later. And also, interestingly enough, these ones here seem to be dome-headed socket head cap screws, whereas these ones at the bottom were hex screws. So what we also had to do is obviously remove the filler neck, which goes through here in the fittings. That was pretty straightforward, and that's pretty much it in the boot. Okay, so let's talk about now underneath the car. So what I had to do underneath the car is I had to get underneath myself. So first of all, we had to disconnect the anti-roll bar, which fits onto some plates which locate on here and here, and correspondingly on the other side. That then allowed us to take the exhaust system off the car, which is now gone, and that then allowed us to carry out some other activities underneath. One of them is to disconnect the speed sensor from the diff, which I think if I carefully, you can just about see the diff, and you can see the cable hanging down. I then was able to follow that cable back, the mating connector to the one you can see in the field of view now. I was able to follow that cabling back into the transmission tunnel, cut the Jubilee clips, and move it away and pull it out of the way. Okay, so other electrical things that we managed to do are to deal with the reversing light switch, which is on the side of the gearbox, and also the handbrake switch, which is up in the transmission tunnel. We also had to deal with the fuel pump, So the fuel pump was there, and disconnect the electrics. The wiring for the fuel pump actually goes back into the boot area through there. I'm not sure if you can see that on the camera or not. Okay, and interesting enough, there's this little box here which is part of the wiring to the fuel pump. I'm not sure exactly what that's to do with at the moment, whether that's some kind of suppressor or whether it's some kind of safety feature, but that'll be going back as we found it later on when we come to rebuild the car. Okay, so moving into the car, we spent quite a bit of time here. So one of the first things we did is we had to clean up a lot of these bolts and things. So you can just see here these nuts. We actually found some of these nuts are actually welded to the chassis, so they don't actually come off. So I think when we actually come to do the work later, I'm going to take those nuts off and just have conventional nuts and bolts that aren't welded. So we cleaned all of those up as well underneath the car. There's a number of those. And then what we then did is took the seats out. So these seat and the seat on the other side came out. Then there were quite a few bolts that came out once we took the seats out. There's a couple at the front in the each of the footwells. There's several here and here. There's some under the corner, which you can just about see down there. I think there's another one under the corner over there, and there's a few dotted around on the floor. I think at this point the thing to make a note of is that the ones that are difficult to see are the ones which are under the dash area through here. There's one there and there's a corresponding one on the other side, and they've got a couple of, on this side there were 4 earth wires attached underneath the bolt head. On the other side there were 2. Also, this center console had to be removed. I think one of the things to make a note of is that the knob which opens the doors from the inside is located onto that shaft with a 1.5mm, or you need a 1.5mm Allen key to actually undo the grub screw which locates it on. That then allows you to take that up to that height there, and then the handbrake was then removed, so that when the body is lifted off, then the body will clear the handbrake. The gear stick that you can see there, that's going to stay in situ, that's going to not move at all, so that's all good. So I think we've done all of the bolts from inside the car. I did find some documentation on the internet which suggested that there were 4 seat belt retaining bolts that you needed to do, but I think there are only 3. There's the catch, or the clasp if you like, that receives the seat belt fixing here, that needs to be removed. There's a couple on this side here, one for the reel, the seat belt reel, which goes through to that plate which you can see there. If I just point to it with my other finger, this one here, and then there was one that comes through into the side here, which is an anchor point. I don't believe that we need to take this one off here, which is the 4th point, because it's not actually part of the chassis. It seems to be bolted into a piece of metal which is retained within the fiberglass shell, from what I can see anyway. We'll find out later. So that was pretty much inside the car. Some of the things we did do is we taped up the locks so that when we close the doors they're not going to catch and you're not having to grab that handle, that shaft, to actually twist to actually open and close well, just to open the door. So we've taped up the boot lock and the door locks so that we can close it to that point there without having to worry about not being able to open the door easily. So yesterday evening what we did here is we took the radiator out. You can see there's no radiator. That's exposed the intercooler, which I designed a few years ago to go with the supercharger. And we took this air inlet pipe off. This was an ACT Products hose that I'd fitted to replace that convoluted one which comes with the car as standard. This header tank was taken off. Unfortunately, during taking that off, one of the riv nuts which fits in this hole actually came out with the bolt. So funnily enough, I bought a very posh nut riveter for a Memfast during the kit car show this year, so I might actually get to use it to replace that riv nut in there at some point. So that was removed. Today's, and also the last of the bolts are these ones down here, so you can't really see, but down there's one of the fixing points that holds the body onto the chassis, and there's another one on this side here, and there's a couple of earth wires attached to that, and it's also shown this additional cable here, which I'm going to have to follow to see where that goes, because when we lift the body that cable's going to come up with it. So today's job is basically to get the engine ready to we'll get a lot of the components off the engine so that the body can pass that. Also to deal with these hoses here, which are the oil lines for the supercharger down to the oil cooler that sits in the front. Also we've got the steering column to deal with, we've got the hydraulics associated with the brakes and the clutch to deal with, and I want to go and have a good look around and a check to make sure that we've got everything. I did rock the body a little yesterday evening, and it did feel quite tight on the chassis at the back. I suspect where I've painted the chassis numerous times over the years, mainly with Pour 15, that's probably ended up sticking the bodywork to the chassis in a few areas. So that's going to be an interesting challenge, really, just to see if we can break that free and make it so it's ready to lift. And that really is pretty much it. We didn't do a record piece by piece yesterday as I'd hoped, because I basically wanted to get on and get the car ready to lift the body off. I'm keen to get on with this project, get the car back together again and drive it. So if you're watching this video, thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.